limit is t goes to 2 of 2 minus the square root of 6 minus t over 3t squared plus 2t minus 16. The first thing we're going to do is try plugging a 2 in for each of the t's. 2 minus the square root of 6 minus t over 3 times 2 squared plus 2 times 2 minus 16. This will give us 2 minus the square root of 6 minus 2 is a 4, divided by 2 squared is 4 times 3 is a 12, plus 2 times 2, which is a 4, minus a 16. 2 minus the square root of 4, which is a 2. 12 plus 4 is a 16, minus a 16. In the numerator, 2 minus 2 is 0. In the denominator, 16 minus 16 is also 0. So we have the 0 over 0 indeterminate form. We will need to rework this. Since we have a root combination, a root involving the variable t in some way, added or subtracted together with at least one other term, we can try the root conjugate method. I am going to rewrite this limit as t goes to 2 of 2 minus the square root of 6 minus t over 3t squared plus 2t minus 16. The conjugate of the root combination is the same two terms in the root combination but opposite sign between them, which means we'll put a plus between them. I'm going to put this over itself, a form of 1, so that when we multiply we're not changing the value, we're just changing the look. And we have limit as t goes to 2 of. We're going to FOIL out the numerator root conjugate pair. First, 2 times 2 is 4. Outside, 2 times the root of 6 minus t. Inside, negative root of 6 minus t times 2. And last, negative root of 6 minus t times the positive root of 6 minus t will give us a negative of 6 minus t. Be sure to put the 6 minus t in parentheses. That's really important there. Now, after FOILing out a root conjugate pair, the outside and inside terms will always be able to cancel. Equal value, opposite sign. In the denominator, we do not have a root conjugate pair. We will therefore not FOIL out these two expressions, but keep them factored instead. Our next step is to distribute that minus sign into this expression here. That will give us limit as t goes to 2 of 4 minus a 6 plus a t. Make sure to distribute it on both terms. The denominator we're going to leave as is. Now our next step is to combine these two constants together here in the numerator. That will give us limit as t goes to 2 of negative 2 plus t over that entire denominator, which I'm still not going to be doing anything with just yet. So we've taken care of the root conjugate multiplication. At this point we now have power functions. We still are 0 over 0. We have not eliminated that just yet. If you plug in a 2 for the t values, that would make a 0 here, and that would make a 0 here. So we will have 0 over 0. Those factors will not cancel each other, though, so we will need to further factor this trinomial quadratic. And that is going to be our next step. In the numerator, I'm going to write the t first and then the minus 2 second. you can do that, just keep the signs correct. And we're going to trinomial factor that trinomial quadratic. We're going to leave that alone. So 3t squared will give us a 3t and a t. I need two numbers that multiply to be negative 16 and add to be a positive 2 after one of them is multiplied by a 3 and the other one is multiplied by a 1. 16 can be 16 and 1. Those 16 and 1 combined with a 3 and a 1, that will not produce a positive 2. It could also be an 8 and a 2. And I believe if we put the 2 here and the 8 here, we will get a 6t here, and we will get an 8t there. And since we want positive 2t, we're going to want that to be a negative 6t and a positive 8t. And as expected, we ended up with a t minus 2 as one of the factors, since t going to 2 was making a 0 over 0, and those two factors can now cancel, which will have eliminated the 0 over 0 indeterminate form. And I'm just going to now rewrite everything that we have left, because our next step will be we can now plug in a 2 for each of our t values. So plugging in a 2, that will give us 1 divided by 3 times 2 plus 8 times 2 plus the square root of 6 minus 2. So that will be 1 divided by 3 times 2 is a 6 plus an 8. And then times 2 plus the square root of 6 minus 2 is a 4. We have 1 over 6 plus 8, which is a 14. And 2 plus the square root of 4, which is also a 2. So we have 1 over 14 times 2 plus 2 is a 4. So we have 1 over 14 times 4. 14 times 4 is 56. So we end up with a 1 over 56.